The morning sun gently illuminated the town of Silver Creek, bathing its cobblestone streets in a golden light that seemed to contradict the shadows looming over the place. It was a small town with fewer than 4,000 residents, surrounded by Oregon's mountains and dense forests. In the center, the local bakery filled the air with the smell of fresh bread, while the church bell rang in the distance, marking the start of another day. Despite its peaceful appearance, the townsfolk moved hurriedly, avoiding eye contact whenever a loud motorcycle roared through the streets. The sound of the Iron Fang's engines was a constant reminder of who really ruled the place. Ellen Monroe, known to her neighbors as Miss Ellie, lived in a modest home on the last street before the hills leading into the forest. It was an old house, with a porch adorned by colorful flowers and a rocking chair where she loved to sit and watch the world go by. At 88 years old, Ellie stood tall, her bright eyes and calm demeanor betraying none of the ghosts from her past. That day, Ellie decided to drive to the local gas station to fill up her car, an old sedan with veteran plates. She liked handling things herself, even though many in town had offered to help. Upon arriving, she parked and entered the convenience store where she found Jake, the 19-year-old attendant, looking more nervous than usual. "Good morning, Jake. Is everything all right?" Ellie asked with a kind smile. Jake hesitated before answering, but he didn't need to say a word. The reason for his tension became clear when 3 members of the Iron Fangs walked into the store. Their leather jackets bore the gang's emblem, an iron jaw intertwined with chains. Leading them was Connor Rogue McCain, a tall, muscular man with cold eyes and a scar running through his right eyebrow. He walked with the confidence of someone who knew no one would dare challenge him. "Well, look who we have here," Rogue said, staring directly at Jake. "I've already told you this week's payment is late. We wouldn't want anything unpleasant to happen, would we?" Jake tried to respond, but his voice faltered. Ellie, noticing the situation, calmly stepped up to the counter. "Leave the boy alone," she said, her voice firm but without hostility. Rogue turned to her, surprised by the interruption. He laughed as if the idea of an elderly woman confronting him was a joke. "And who are you, Granny?" he sneered, stepping closer to speak right in Ellie's face. "Shouldn't you be tending to your garden instead of sticking your nose where it doesn't belong?" Ellie didn't flinch. She met Rogue's gaze directly, fearless, with a calmness that was almost unsettling. "I'm Ellen Monroe," she replied evenly, "a war veteran, and I understand far more than you think." Rogue noticed the veteran plates on Ellie's car outside and smirked mockingly. "A veteran, huh? You think that impresses me? You're too old to be a threat." He grabbed Ellie's arm, gripping it tightly. "You'd better get out of here before you get hurt." Jake tried to intervene, but Ellie raised her hand, signaling him to stop. Instead of reacting, she simply smiled enigmatically. "How you just made a mistake, boy," she said, her tone almost amused. Rogue let go of her arm, laughing at the situation, and left the store with his men, roaring with laughter as they mounted their motorcycles. Ellie, however, was far from intimidated. As soon as they were out of sight, she pulled out her phone and made a call she hadn't made in decades. On the other end of the line, Marcus Steele Grant answered with his deep, warm voice. "Ellie, is that you?" he asked, surprised. "It's me, Marcus. I need your help. We've got a problem in Silver Creek, and I think it's time to get the group back together." There was a pause on the other end. Then Marcus replied with determination, "Tell me when and where." Ellie hung up the phone and turned to Jake, who still looked shaken. "Don't worry, Jake. This is going to change," she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We're going to bring peace back to Silver Creek." As Jake looked at Ellie with a mix of admiration and confusion, unsure of what she had in mind, a new energy began to stir in the town. The Iron Fangs had no idea they'd awakened the fighting spirit of a woman who had faced far greater battles than they could ever imagine. On the other side of the state, in Portland, Marcus Steele Grant hung up the phone with a serious expression. Sitting in a garage where he repaired motorcycles, Marcus carried himself with the posture of a natural leader, his graying hair and face lined with years of battles, both on the military field and in civilian life, did nothing to diminish his imposing presence. He glanced at an old photo on the wall, taken during the Korean War. In it, a group of soldiers, muddy and battle-worn, posed with smiles, and right in the center was Ellie, her expression of determination unmistakable. "Ellie, you never ask for help without a good reason," he murmured to himself. Marcus stood up, draping the Iron Vet's vest over his shoulders, and began making calls to the veterans who made up the club. Each member had a story marked by wars ranging from Vietnam to Afghanistan. They all shared one thing in common: a deep respect for Ellie Monroe. She wasn't just a hero to them, she was almost mythical, someone who had risked her life to save many of them during missions where death seemed inevitable. When Marcus explained the situation in Silver Creek, the response was unanimous. "We're with you, Steele, for Ellie, for what she stands for," one of the members said firmly. Meanwhile, in Silver Creek, Ellie was getting things ready. She knew the Iron Fangs were brutal but not organized. Their leader, Rogue, relied on brute strength and fear, but lacked the strategic training that Ellie and the Iron Vets possessed. Using an old map of the town that she kept at home, Ellie began marking vulnerable points. Businesses being extorted, entrances and exits to the town, and even the bar where the gang gathered. Fang's Den. That same day, Marcus and around 15 Iron Vets members arrived in town, their motorcycles roaring as they rode down Silver Creek's main road. Their arrival drew immediate attention. Some residents peeked out from their windows, curious and hopeful, while others hid, fearful of more trouble. Rogue, who was at the Fang's Den, heard the noise and stepped outside to see what was happening. His expression hardened as he saw the bikers parking in front of the gas station, where Ellie was waiting. "What the hell is this?" Rogue muttered angrily. At the gas station, Marcus got off his bike and walked over to Ellie. He embraced her tightly, the respect in his gesture clear. "Still causing trouble wherever you go, huh?" he said with a smile. "You know how it is, Marcus. I was never good at staying quiet." Ellie returned the smile, but her gaze was serious. "They're terrorizing this town. People need help, and I knew I could count on you." Marcus looked around, carefully observing the town. He felt the weight of fear hanging over the place, but also noticed something else. The spark of hope beginning to ignite in the eyes of the few residents brave enough to watch the scene. "We'll handle it," Marcus said firmly. "But first, we need a plan." They gathered at Ellie's garage, which was quickly transformed into an improvised headquarters. With the town map spread out on the table and the dim light of a hanging lamp overhead, Ellie began explaining her strategy. "The Iron Fangs rely on fear to control this town. They don't have discipline or real unity. We, on the other hand, have plenty of that." Ellie pointed to the map. "We'll start by protecting the most vulnerable spots. The bakery, the market, and the gas station. They know these businesses are essential to the town. If we show them they no longer have control over them, the townspeople will start trusting us." Marcus nodded as another veteran, Thomas Tank Murphy, a massive man with a thick mustache, suggested, "What about their supply routes? If we can cut off their drugs and weapons, they'll start to weaken." "Exactly," Ellie agreed. "But we need intel, and for that we need someone to get close to them." Jake, who had been silent until then, hesitated before speaking. "I can help. I work at the gas station and they always stop there to refuel or collect money. I know a few things, like where they stash the drugs, for example." All eyes turned to Jake. Marcus narrowed his eyes, sizing up the young man. He was young, but there was determination in his voice. "Are you sure about this, kid?" Marcus asked. "We're not dealing with schoolyard bullies. This could get ugly." Jake took a deep breath before answering. "I'm sure. They can't keep doing this to our town." Ellie placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, smiling approvingly. "You're braver than you think, Jake. We'll guide you. You won't be alone." As the plan began to take shape, the tension in Silver Creek only grew. Rogue had been informed of the arrival of the Iron Vets, and he didn't like it one bit. He knew this was a direct challenge to his authority. In a fit of rage, he hurled a glass against the wall of Fang's den. "Those old-timers think they can mess with me?" he roared, glaring at his men. "We'll show them who's boss around here." He started reaching out to contacts, including a Mexican cartel that served as his drug supplier. Rogue knew he needed more powerful allies if he wanted to face the group of veterans. As night fell over Silver Creek, the streets were quieter than usual. The Iron Vets patrolled the local businesses, while Ellie and Marcus worked on the details of the plan. There was a lot at stake, and both knew this would be a battle that required not just strength, but also intelligence and strategy. Ellie gazed at the city through the window of her home, her thoughts drifting to the battles she had fought in the past. She knew that taking on the Iron Fangs wouldn't be easy, but this time she felt something different. Hope. "We're going to win this," she murmured to herself, "for everyone's sake." The next morning brought a heavy atmosphere to Silver Creek. The sound of the Iron Fangs' motorcycles echoed through the town, like a constant reminder of the growing tension. But there was something different in the air. The presence of the Iron Vets, quietly patrolling the streets and offering support to local businesses, began to inspire a long-dormant sense of courage in the community. Shop owners who used to close their doors at the first sign of trouble were now exchanging glances of solidarity with the veterans. They were still scared, but fear was giving way to a spark of resistance. In Ellie's garage, which continued to serve as the operations headquarters, the veterans had gathered once again. Jake, the gas station attendant, had decided to share everything he knew. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and began sketching a small makeshift map on the table. "This is where they keep the drugs," he said, pointing to an abandoned warehouse on the eastern outskirts of town. "They use the place to stash weapons too. They usually only go there at night." Ellie, standing next to Marcus, studied the map closely. Her military experience made every detail feel like a piece on a strategic board. "Marcus, this could be our chance to take out one of their legs," Ellie said. "If we destroy their stockpile of weapons and drugs, they'll not only lose power, but also draw attention from their suppliers. That could cause a rift between them and the cartel." Marcus nodded. "Sounds like a good plan, but we need to move quickly and precisely. No noise. We don't want to hurt anyone or alert the cartel too soon. We'll need a small team," Ellie added, "just enough to get in and out without being noticed. And Jake," she looked at the young man, "you've done your part so far. Leave the rest to us." Jake looked relieved but determined. He knew this was far too dangerous for him, but he trusted the veterans. That very night, as the sky over Silver Creek turned into a starless void, Ellie, Marcus, Tank, and 3 other Iron Vets set out for the warehouse. They were equipped only with flashlights, tools to cut locks, and the precision of those who had spent years on infiltration missions. Despite her age, Ellie walked with purpose, her eyes sharp for any suspicious movement. To her, it felt like stepping back in time, to when impossible missions were part of her routine. When they reached the warehouse, everything was quiet. The Iron Fang's motorcycles weren't in sight, but there were signs of recent activity. Tire marks and beer cans littered the ground. Tank, with his brute strength, managed to break the rusty lock on the back door. They entered silently, lighting up the interior with their flashlights. The air was thick with the smell of oil and mildew. The warehouse was larger than they expected. Stacks of boxes were piled against the walls, each labeled with suspicious markings. Ellie inspected one of the boxes and found bags of a white powder neatly packed. "It's cocaine," she said coldly. "More than enough to supply major cities." Marcus found another crate and opened it, revealing automatic rifles and ammunition. He let out a low whistle. "They're more armed than I thought. If Rogue is planning something big, this is where it starts." "Then this is where it ends," Ellie replied, pulling out a small gas canister they'd brought along. "Let's put an end to it right now." While Tank and another veteran spread gasoline throughout the warehouse, Ellie and Marcus continued inspecting the area for anything else. That's when Ellie came across a smaller box, secured with a reinforced padlock. Marcus forced it open, revealing a collection of documents and a burner phone. "This could be our biggest weapon," Ellie said, examining the papers. "It's a list of contacts and transactions. Looks like Rogue and the cartel have bigger operations than we thought. If we can get this to the right authorities, it'll be the end of them." "Thomas first. Let's finish this place," Marcus said. They completed their task and slipped out of the warehouse silently, leaving behind an improvised fuse to ignite the fire. The explosion was contained but intense enough to consume everything inside. The flames lit up the Silver Creek sky for a brief moment before the veterans disappeared into the darkness, leaving no trace behind. When news of the explosion reached the Iron Fangs the next morning, Rogue was furious. He kicked over a table at the Fangs' den, his eyes blazing with anger. One of his men, visibly intimidated, approached hesitantly. "It was the group of old vets," he said. "They're patrolling the streets, protecting businesses, and now this—" Rogue clenched his fists. "This is a declaration of war. If they want to fight, we'll give them what they asked for." He grabbed his phone and made a call. On the other end of the line, a man with a raspy voice answered. "Rogue, what happened?" "I need reinforcements," Rogue replied. "Those old vets are sticking their noses where they don't belong. I want you to send your best men." "That'll cost you," the voice said dryly. "I don't care. I want this handled. Today." While Rogue planned his retaliation, Ellie and Marcus were back at the garage, this time with the community. Several residents had decided it was time to take a stand. The owners of the market and the bakery offered supplies, while others began organizing a communication network to alert the Iron Vets to any suspicious activity. "They're going to hit back, and it's going to be ugly," Marcus said, addressing the group. "But we have something they don't. Unity." Ellie added, "Silver Creek doesn't belong to them. It belongs to all of us. And together, we'll beat them." Ellie's words echoed like a call to resistance. For the first time in years, the town had something Rogue and the Iron Fangs could never destroy: hope. The next morning brought heavy clouds over Silver Creek, as if the sky itself sensed the storm brewing. The explosion at the warehouse had weakened the Iron Fangs, but their retaliation promised to be brutal. Ellie and Marcus knew this. They understood that Rogue wasn't the kind of man to take a defeat quietly, and his ties to the cartel made things even more dangerous. In Ellie's garage, the atmosphere was one of preparation and focus. The Iron Vets, now larger in number, reinforced by veterans from nearby towns who'd heard about the cause, were gathered in a circle, discussing their next move. Ellie, her voice firm yet reassuring, led the group. "They're going to hit back, and they won't hold back," she said, looking each person in the eye. "But remember, we're not here to start an open war. Our strength lies in strategy and unity. Let's use what we've learned from the past to make them vulnerable. One step at a time." Marcus nodded, crossing his arms. "We need to keep the town safe. Their focus now will be on intimidating the community to break our support base. We can't let that happen." Jake, sitting in the corner of the garage, raised his hand, a timid gesture but filled with determination. "I can help more. I know they usually meet at the bar at night to plan. I can listen to what they're saying and bring back information." Ellie looked at him, carefully assessing his courage and sincerity. It was clear that Jake wanted to be helpful, but putting him at risk was a difficult decision. "All right, Jake," Ellie said finally. "But you're not doing this alone. We'll organize discreet surveillance. No reckless heroics, understood?" Jake nodded quickly, his determination growing with the support he felt from the veterans. That night, while the town tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, the Iron Vets and some townsfolk formed a surveillance network. They monitored the Fang's den and the town's entry and exit points. Ellie, despite her age, was at the center of the action, sitting in a pickup truck parked on a quiet street, watching movements through an old pair of binoculars. "You really never stop, do you?" Marcus said, sitting beside her in the vehicle, his smile weary. "The war doesn't end just because we want it to, Marcus," Ellie replied with a faint smile. "I learned that a long time ago, and I won't stop until this town is free." Meanwhile, inside the Fang's den, Rogue was meeting with his top men and two newcomers, mercenaries sent by the cartel. One was a burly man with a scar on his chin named Vargas, infamous for being a ruthless enforcer. The other, slimmer and quieter, seemed to constantly scan his surroundings like a snake ready to strike. "The old fools think they can challenge me and get away with it?" Rogue shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "Vargas, I want you to deal with this. Find their weak spot and hit them hard. Show them what happens when they mess with me." Vargas nodded, but not without a cynical smirk. "We'll handle it. But for a clean job, we'll need more intel on who we're dealing with." Rogue scoffed, irritated. "They're just old soldiers and a few stupid civilians. They're no problem for you." But Vargas didn't seem so sure. He knew that war veterans were a different breed. Their discipline and training could be far more dangerous than the brute force of a gang. Outside, Jake was positioned in the alley behind the bar, hidden among trash cans and piles of wood. He was using a simple recorder to capture snippets of conversation. When he heard the names Vargas and mercenaries, his heart raced. He knew he had to get that information to Ellie immediately. Jake slipped silently out of the alley and ran to Ellie's garage, where he handed over the recording. Ellie and Marcus listened carefully, their faces hardening as they absorbed the gravity of the situation. "Mercenaries? That complicates things," Marcus said, scratching his chin. "We can't face them head-on," Ellie said. "We need something to destabilize them, something that forces them to back off before they can act." "What if we use the cartel against them?" suggested Tank, leaning against the wall. "If we set things up so the cartel sees Rogue as a liability instead of an asset, they'll take care of him for us." Ellie thought for a moment, her gaze fixed on the map of the town. "It's risky, but it could work. If we use the documents we found in the warehouse to expose Rogue's operations, the cartel will want to sever ties with him before they're exposed too. But we'll need solid evidence and fast." The veterans agreed, and the plan began to take shape. While some members of the Iron Vets continued patrolling the town, Ellie and Marcus worked with Jake and other allies to gather evidence and prepare an anonymous report to send to the authorities and, indirectly, to the cartel. Meanwhile, Rogue, completely unaware of the trap being set, ordered his men to start putting pressure on the townsfolk. They broke into shops, smashed windows, and left threatening messages to remind everyone who was still in charge. But at every one of these incidents, the Iron Vets were there, protecting businesses and encouraging the owners to stand their ground. In one of these confrontations, Rogue decided to act personally. He and Vargas led a group of bikers to the local grocery store, where they began tearing down shelves and intimidating customers. But before they could cause more damage, Marcus and Tank arrived with 3 more veterans, blocking the entrance with their motorcycles. "It's over, Rogue," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You've lost control of this town." Rogue laughed mockingly. "You think you can take me on?" He looked at Vargas, who pulled out a knife and stepped forward. But before anything could happen, Ellie appeared in the doorway of the grocery store, her presence imposing despite her advanced age. In her hands, she held a recorder. "I have everything I need to bring you down, Rogue," she said calmly. "Your allies will abandon you the moment they realize you're a threat to them." Rogue hesitated, his confidence shaken by the presence of this woman who seemed unbreakable. But he didn't know the worst was yet to come. The silence following Ellie's words was heavy. Rogue, with clenched fists, tried to maintain his posture of superiority, but something in the woman's eyes made him falter. She wasn't afraid. Worse, she knew exactly how to strike him where it hurt most. Vargas, who had so far seemed indifferent, analyzed the situation more carefully. He realized this wasn't an ordinary confrontation, and that Rogue was dangerously close to losing control. "You think you can take me down with a recorder?" Rogue growled, trying to mask his insecurity. "I have powerful allies. A bunch of old folks and a recorder won't change anything." Ellie stepped forward, maintaining her calm demeanor, but her voice carried the weight of someone who had faced hell and survived. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about you. I have enough evidence to take down your entire operation and catch the attention of those above you. And when they realize you're more of a problem than a solution, it'll be the end. And it won't be by my hands." Rogue hesitated. He knew Ellie was talking about the cartel, his suppliers. His anger and pride blinded him, but the cold logic of her words pierced his armor. The silence was broken by Marcus, who stepped forward beside Ellie, his deep voice carrying authority. "It's simple, Rogue. Walk away now and leave this town in peace, or we'll let your allies deal with you. Your choice." Vargas stepped closer, drawing Rogue's attention. "She's not bluffing," he said, his tone neutral but threatening. "You know how the cartel handles leaks. You'd better deal with this before things spiral even further out of control." Rogue looked at Vargas, realizing that even the mercenary was starting to question his leadership. He felt the weight of his own arrogance bearing down on him, but instead of backing down, his explosive temper took over. He pulled a gun from his waistband and pointed it directly at Ellie. "If you think you can intimidate me, you're dead wrong." The air grew heavy. Time seemed to freeze. Ellie, however, didn't move. Her gaze remained locked on Rogue's, as if daring him to shoot. Before he could pull the trigger, Marcus stepped forward quickly, placing himself between Ellie and the gun. "Not today, Rogue," he said, his voice steady as a rock. Outside, the sound of sirens began to echo through the town. Ellie had sent the evidence she'd gathered to a state police department in Portland, where there were still officers willing to take on organized crime. The documents, recordings, and evidence were damning enough to dispatch a team of federal agents to Silver Creek that very night. Rogue looked around, realizing the tide was turning against him. The sirens grew louder, and the Iron Vets stood ready to respond to any move. Vargas, seeing the situation spiraling out of control, took 2 steps back, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "This isn't what I was hired for," he said coldly. "I'm out." Without Vargas and the mercenaries' support, Rogue was left alone. His men, realizing the magnitude of the trouble, began retreating, leaving him isolated in the middle of the grocery store. He glanced around frantically, trying to find an escape, but there was nowhere to go. "It ends here, Rogue," Ellie said, with the serenity of someone who knew victory was near. "You're no longer the predator. You're just prey." Desperate, Rogue tried to run, but he was stopped by Tank, who grabbed him with overwhelming force, pinning him to the ground. Minutes later, police cars arrived, and the officers quickly took control of the situation. Rogue was handcuffed and taken away, screaming incoherent threats, but no one was listening anymore. The police also apprehended the few remaining members of the Iron Fangs who were still in town, along with weapons and drugs hidden in other locations, identified through Ellie's evidence. Silver Creek was finally free. A few days later, the town began to transform. Doors that were once always shut now stayed open. Residents who had lived under the weight of fear could finally breathe easy. The Iron Vets, now local heroes, helped rebuild the businesses damaged during the gang's attacks. The bakery, the market, and even Jake's gas station now had frequent customers and an air of optimism. Jake, who had proven to be a true ally, was now seen as an example of courage for the town's youth. He helped the veterans in every way he could, learning from them the value of resilience and unity. Ellie, on the other hand, continued living in her simple home, with freshly planted flowers adorning the porch. But now people from the town lined up to thank her. She had become more than a heroine. She was the soul of Silver Creek, proof that age and hardships could never extinguish the strength of a determined heart. That afternoon, Marcus and the other veterans gathered on Ellie's porch. They laughed and shared old stories, celebrating their victory. "You know, you could have just rested and left all this chaos behind," Marcus said, smiling at Ellie. Why did you get involved? Ellie looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to set over the mountains. Because it was the right thing to do, she replied simply. I didn't fight so many battles in the past just to let an entire town surrender to fear. That's never been who I am. Marcus raised a beer bottle and held it up high. To Ellie Monroe, the greatest fighter we've ever known. Everyone toasted, and Ellie chuckled softly, though her gaze remained fixed on the horizon. Silver Creek was safe, and the ghosts that had once haunted the town were now just memories. The battle was won, but the message Ellie had left behind would echo forever. Unity and courage can prevail even in the darkest moments. If you enjoyed this emotional story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. We bring you incredible stories almost every day, and you can explore many of them through the links appearing on your screen now. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.